Welcome to Ohio Roots, the official podcast of the Ohio Genealogical Society. Join us as we embark on a captivating journey through Ohio's rich genealogy, history, and abundant resources. Hosted by me, OGS Executive Director Noel Poirier, this podcast brings you insightful conversations with a diverse array of guests, from OGS members, chapter leaders, and staff to renowned genealogists, historians, and influential figures within the genealogical community. Each episode delves into fascinating topics and captivating stories. So grab your headphones, hit that play button, and join us on this enthralling journey of Ohio's roots. Welcome to the Ohio Roots podcast. This episode, we're joined by Maureen Brady, a former school librarian and computer educator with more than 30 years of genealogical research experience. At the 2026 Ohio Genealogical Society Conference, she'll be exploring the Scots-Irish frontier, the British diaspora, Southern Illinois research, and how to truly analyze your evidence. Let's dive into our conversation with Maureen Brady. Well, Maureen Brady, thank you for joining me once again on the OGS Ohio Roots podcast. We spoke to you before the 2025 OGS conference, so I'm looking forward to our conversation today about what you have planned for us at the 2026 OGS conference. So thanks for being here.
You're quite welcome.
You've got, I think, 4 sessions that you're giving, and we'll kind of look at each one individually as we kind of go along here today. But you've researched so many different regions and cultures. What first drove you to the idea of looking at migration patterns and where people move to and things like that?
I think it started because my mom's parents were the immigrants from Scotland. They came over in 1913, and being that recent and having a lot of the Scottish culture in the household I grew up in, I started to think about the life that they had left behind and how it may or may not have been similar, and how that Scottish culture stuck with them for so long. That, and I grew up in a very immigrant neighborhood in Chicago. In my high school class, we had 75 different ethnicities.
Wow.
And all those various languages. So my girlfriends and the things we did in school, the churches they went to, all of that reflected what makes people, what drives them, and why do they feel that this was a better place to come? And it's just started me thinking along those paths.
Okay. I know you studied your Scottish roots back quite a bit. Was there something kind of most exciting or surprising in your Scottish roots that you found along the way?
In a way, I found that I think he's my 8th great-grandfather. So in high school, I took Latin and did very, very well at it. And I was a teacher. And then I found out that this 8th great-grandfather was fluent enough in Greek and Latin to receive a college bursary in those languages, and subsequently became a school teacher, a schoolmaster. So it jumped 7 generations, but it says, okay, these things are always still in us. I was kind of surprised at that. I was more surprised at my Irish side. My dad was Irish and Chicago Irish back to the 1840s, and found that his grandfather, great-grandfather, actually lived across the street from where the Chicago fire started. Wow. It's kind of neat. Their house didn't burn because they were on the other side from the wind.
Jeez, that's some good luck. One of the programs you're presenting in 2026, the conference, is called the First Frontiersmen, the Scots-Irish.
Yes.
Take a minute and define the term Scots-Irish, because I know there's a lot of folks who get very easily confused by that term.
There's so much confusion around that. And we only use that term Scots-Irish here in the United States. In Ireland, they're called Ulster Scots.
Right.
And that's because most of them come out of the former province of Ulster, Northern Ireland, for the most part. They relate back to a group of people who were mostly forcibly moved in the early 1600s to the mid-1600s from the borderlands of Scotland and England to Northern Ireland by James I or VI, depending on which country you're in, to settle a Protestant presence in a Catholic country. They stayed for about 100 years. They're still there, obviously, but about 100 years after that, with the conditions being what they were in Ireland and not much better than anybody else, and having William Penn out there in Penn's Woods, greeting people and saying, you've got religious freedom, you've got freedom of your own life here, and you're welcome. It was unlike any of the other English colonies. And so seeking that better life, they came to Pennsylvania. The Germans were already there, settled, so they moved out to the frontier. They were very independent people who didn't really like government rule, having come from those border areas originally. And so they became the frontiersmen of Pennsylvania and subsequently on to the Shenandoah Valley and the western reaches of Virginia and the Carolinas, and then through the Cumberland Gap into Kentucky and Tennessee and so forth. So if we take a look at our American roots, we're looking at the people that brought us today's country music, today's square dancing, a lot of our independent and conservative way of thinking, and in many ways also our willingness to serve, to fight for what we believe in.
Yeah, it's always interesting, having researched that era and that region. It's, you do find they were essentially set up as a buffer zone,
Yes.
between the eastern colonies and the frontier itself, and we're kind of the perfect people to do that. It seems like.
It seems that way, yes.
Yeah. What kinds of records are really helpful if you're researching a Scots-Irish family?
Depending on the time frame, of course, but one of the good sides of it is that because of the Tennessee, Carolina, Kentucky, and Virginia roots, the records do go back into colonial times. Mm-hmm. And those 4 particular states have been doing a very good job of identifying them, digitizing them, getting them accessible in some way or another. You do have to be willing to dig into the deeds and the land records, learning metes and bounds, how to describe your property, because it was different. And you just have to kind of take a look at every single thing. Most of what I've been successful with is because I did the online research, but then I went to the courthouses and I dug into the court records of various types. And typically, if you take that time and do it carefully, that's where you'll find your breakthroughs and your ability to go back.
How does geography, and particularly the frontier and the role of the Scots-Irish on the frontier, how does that shape the kind of records you're looking for?
It does, because if you're taking a look at where if they ended up in Kentucky, they're likely to come from Virginia.
Right.
If they ended up in Middle Tennessee or even Eastern Tennessee, but especially Middle Tennessee, they're likely to have come from North Carolina. And before North Carolina, it still would have been Virginia. There is a definite migration pattern down that valley area from Pennsylvania. Right. So you take a look at your time frame, and then you take a look at, were they in the middle? Were they up in Kentucky? Did they end up on the Ohio River on the line from the Cumberland Gap? And so that's going to take you back again to Virginia and so on. If you're looking later, then did they perhaps come by way of the Erie Canal earlier on, if they were much later? So Southern Illinois being one of the key areas, a lot of people think, well, they came down the Ohio. Well, they did and they didn't. They really came up from Tennessee by way of the Tennessee and Cumberland rivers.
Okay.
So geography does make a big impact in that.
So let's, since you broached the subject of Southern Illinois, let's talk about that, because you'll be doing a program on Southern Illinois research specifically. Yep. Why is Southern Illinois kind of genealogically significant?
It's the earliest part of Illinois that was settled, and it reaches back into the French-Canadian time, because the earliest settlements down there were French-Canadian, dating back to the 1600s. Cahokia has the oldest operating Catholic church in the United States. So we have deep French-Canadian roots that then were supplanted by those that followed George Rogers Clark because they had served with him or whatever. So it's a mixture of that old French with the new Scots-Irish, the miners coming even later than that. It's a very interesting area. And interestingly, they have done a great job in preserving their records. unlike other parts of Illinois, even when you get down into southern Illinois, you can spend days and days going through everything that they've put together. Their historical societies are wonderful. Their genealogical society that they have down there is very active. So while it's not easy, it's more like it's overwhelming.
Hi, everyone. Noel Poirier here, Executive Director of the Ohio Genealogical Society and your host for the Ohio Roots podcast. Did you know you can help preserve the past and empower the future? Your donation to the Ohio Genealogical Society helps protect vital family history records and supports research for generations to come. Visit www.ogs.org/donate and give today. Thank you so much for your support. Get ready for the 2025 OGS Annual Conference coming to Sharonville, Ohio, April 29th through May 2nd, 2026. Join genealogists and family historians from across the country for 4 days of inspiring sessions, expert speakers, research tools, and community connections. Don't miss your chance to discover new stories and strengthen your family history skills. Registration opens November 28th, so be sure to register and be part of Ohio's premier genealogy event. So what makes Southern Illinois research particularly challenging?
Frequency of the names.
Okay.
Because they all came out of the same regions, primarily,
Right.
especially as you get earlier, even into the French, you're looking at in maybe 10 or 20 surnames that keep popping up all over. And you really have to be extremely careful that you're following the right Charles Baisden, for instance. The one family that I've worked on, there were 5 Charles Baisdens in the same township at the same time, all born within 5 years of each other.
Oh, my.
So they were all related, obviously,
Right.
but keeping track of which was which and which had which wife, you have to be very, very careful with that.
How does kind of the migration to Southern Illinois, how does the patterns kind of blend with other Midwest and Trans-Allegheny regions and how they were settled?
The Midwest generally, and this is very general, are primarily German. They were a much later migration. They came primarily by way of the Erie Canal and the Great Lakes, perhaps by way of northern Ohio and northern Indiana later on, where southern Illinois is some of our oldest roots of settlement in today's Midwest, that and southern Indiana. They've been there so much longer than the rest of us, and they're also a forgotten region for a lot of people. It's not particularly agriculture, what you think of the Midwest as being.
Sure.
It's a lot of mining down there, a lot of mining, which is now pretty much gone, but that's what brought a lot of people there. It's also dialect. There's a different dialect in southern Illinois that does not reflect the rest of the Midwest dialect. It's really a very, very unique region, and they're quite proud of it.
Speaking of migration, one of your other programs you're doing is on the British diaspora.
Yes.
And I will give me a few minutes or a few seconds if you can just explain what you mean by that.
So Great Britain, well, under Queen Victoria especially, but before that, Britain spread out around the world. There used to be a saying that the sun never set on the British Empire. And it was literally true. There was some part of the world at any point in time that was under that British monarchy, that British flag. And because it was a land of opportunity for some and a land of incarceration for others, because that was one of the places that Britain sent people to when their prisons filled up, it spread out. So, for instance, in my own family, in some stayed in Scotland, but I have collateral lines in Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, the Caribbean, India, Ceylon, and I'm still discovering Canada. Almost any part of that former British Empire, I have a collateral line.
Sure.
And I'm not unusual.
How does studying and understanding the diaspora help people kind of with finding brick walls or breaking through brick walls or just learning more about their family lines in general that they may not be aware of?
Well, I think the first thing is to not assume that they always stayed in the British Isles.
Right.
That because they disappeared from Scotland, oh yeah, they went down to England or whatever. that's the first thing, is to recognize that movement, though it would have been months-long journey in some places, it still occurred, and it occurred more often than we think it did. So we need to recognize that there's potential there, that when we get a DNA match down in Australia, not to say, oh no, they never went there.
Right.
Somebody probably did.
Yeah.
And then when you have to take a look at, well, it's India. How in the world would I research India? Well, remember, it was under British law and custom, especially in the time periods we're looking at. So we're still looking at British type records. So people get really, well, I can't do that because, and if they then switch their mindset, oh, well, yeah, I guess I can.
Is it helpful that it's in English?
Yes.
If you're researching ancestors in Ceylon or India, is it helpful that those records are still in English?
They're still in English. That is one of the things that perhaps the best thing that the British Empire ever gave us, was they kept everything in English. Ceylon is, for instance, when you look at the civil records, the birth and marriage and so on, it's written in 4 languages. Every form has all 4 languages on the headings, but one is English. It's always got the English.
Your 4th program you're offering is called Analyzing Your Research.
Yes.
Broad stroke for me, what that's about.
Well, I work in family research centers, and often someone will come in and they've got a question, and then I'll go, well, have you taken a look at the census? Well, yeah. Well, did you take a look at, did it say they were married once or twice? Oh, does it tell me that? People were not actually looking closely at what any given form was and what leads and hints it might give you. So I developed this to say, well, look, here's what the census can help you. Take a look at the church records. Take a look at tax lists. Do we have a pattern of everybody in the neighborhood moving together, or it appears to move together? A lot of people just either don't understand how to do that, or they really don't where you can do it. And so that's why I developed that particular presentation, to make us all stop, and I do it myself, is to stop and take a look at, wait a minute, let's take a look at what's underneath here, or what's less obvious, but still is telling me something.
Right. How do you coach someone who's doing that research to be able to tell the difference between information they're looking at that's a solid kind of conclusion, but then there's also sometimes information that gives us kind of a tempting assumption? How do you coach people away from tempting assumptions and more towards the solid conclusions?
Well, the first thing I always teach is back it up with as much other sources as you can. And then if you start to find conflicting information, I use timelines a lot.
Okay.
And if I do urban, if it's an urban family, I'll also trace out, are they living on the north side or living on the south side? Because if they're living on the north side, they did not go to church on the south side, and things like that.
Sure.
Sometimes, I was saying, I still learn this. You look at a census, and in my case, 1910, and head of household, and it says owns the home. It's always on the head of household line. 2 years later, when they passed away, I found out it was his wife who owned that house outright in her own name. Funny. And I had always made the assumption owner is the head of household. So I've learned a nuance to that now that I can help people learn. It's mainly pointing out when I coach, it's mainly, well, have you looked at this? And do you realize that that's a 2 next to that M, which means that's that person's second marriage? Oh, I just thought it was a number. So sometimes it's just a matter of showing them what they're missing.
Sure.
That's right in front of them.
It's interesting, and you and those of us who do genealogy, and particularly those of us who access a lot of our records online as well, recognize that every day one of the major genealogy websites is uploading documents that have been looked, in some cases AI searched already. How often do you, as a genealogist, recommend people going back and reassessing their information because of
constantly?
That kind of thing? Yeah.
Constantly. I think sometimes patrons get a little shall we say, frustrated with me because they'll come in and they'll say something or show me something, and I'll go, well, where's the document that supports that? Have you looked at it again? Well, does it say anything about this? Oh, well, I never looked. I'm constantly doing that, and I'm constantly looking at my own. One of the best things that ever happened to me is I switched. One of my previous computer programs was no longer being supported, and I had to go to a new program. It also wouldn't come over in GEDCOM very clearly. So I had to re-enter all of that data, but in the process, it made me relook at all of my research.
Yeah,
which was a very good thing.
Yeah. If listeners could apply just one idea from all four of your presentations that they'll take away from your going to see you this year at this OGS conference, what's that one thing you want them to take away?
Take a deep dive into what you're looking at. Just don't go the surface read. Take a real good close look at it.
Well, Maureen Brady, thank you again for joining me today for the OGS Ohio Roots podcast. It's been a pleasure. Looking forward to seeing you again at the end of April at the OGS conference, and take care.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to this episode, and a big thank you to Maureen Brady for sharing her expertise on the Scots-Irish, the British diaspora, Southern Illinois research, and sharpening our analytical skills. Be sure to catch her sessions at the 2026 Ohio Genealogical Society Conference. And until next time, keep digging into your family story, and thanks for listening to the OGS Ohio Roots podcast. If you enjoy listening to the Ohio Roots podcast, we would really appreciate it if you could go to whatever platform it is that you listen and give us a good review. Reviews help us get more listeners and reach more people with Ohio Roots and what we're trying to do with the Ohio Genealogical Society. So please, leave us a nice review, and thanks for listening.
The Ohio Roots podcast is brought to you by the Ohio Genealogical Society, the premier gateway for discovering your Ohio family history. Hosted by OGS Executive Director Mill Poyer and edited by Luke Poyer. Theme song is Beautiful Ohio, recorded by Bob Stanley and his orchestra in 1944. To learn more about joining the Ohio Genealogical Society, visit www.ogs.org.